Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Siege of Skyhold, chapters 7 through 14. Center of Attention, Fire and Lightning, Start of Term, Mentors, Math with a View, Supply Run, Dragonclaw Yardangs, and The Herdsman. A whole lot of chapters this time around, kiddos. In these chapters, we get to see how Skyhold is preparing for the siege that is coming, find out about some pretty high-level deaths, and Hugh is assigned to a new mission, which obviously Candoron does not approve of. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is in the chat and was very excited about chapter 23, thinking that was this episode, but it is not. I'm going to go ahead and look. Yeah, we got another two episodes before that. So, well, I guess this episode, the next one, and then the one after that contains chapter 23. So a little bit more of a wait there, Dan. But this section, all the chapters were super short, so that is why there were so many in a row. So we have the start of Center of Attention, where they arrive at Skyhold, and everybody is sort of startled at the amount of activity that is going on here. Which, obviously we find out this makes total sense because we are... What's the word I want? They're getting all of the supplies that they need. They are getting ready to hunker down. And there is a lot of trade happening. There are some people who are leaving Skyhold. But as we find out later, most parents seem to think that Skyhold is like the safest place for their kid, which personally I would agree. I think that ultimately that's going to prove to be untrue, but operating with the information I've got now, I would make the same choice as them. Sort of reminds me of, everybody being like, well, there's no safer place than Hogwarts for our students because the Voldemort certainly can't get in there. And there's an interesting moment here where he's looking around at all the ships, wondering if the Moonless Owl is here because he's like, just kind of idly looking for Ava. And he feels guilty as he realizes what he's looking for. But then Ava asks, do you think the Moonless Owl is here? I like Ava. I wouldn't mind seeing her. And also, I think it would do the two of you good to have a chat now that your relationship is a little further behind you. And she says something about how I have some gloating to do. I'm too amazing and dangerous to feel any need for jealousy. And I just find that very funny, considering the jealousy that we have seen from Talia. Apparently, that only applies when she has the upper hand. But if she doesn't, then it's, just sort of all bets are off. So Candoron lands, and there's this moment here. He doesn't see Ava's ship, but he sees a lot of other Radhan, and he sees all the food that they're bringing in, and it's mentioned that they have a ton of stuff that's pickled. And that pickled food helps fend off scurvy, which I never really thought about. But that makes total sense, because you often pickle vegetables, and things that are going to have vitamin C are usually plant-based. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But also, he says something about how they're delicious. And Archer says you can get sick of them, though. And I was like, yeah, I like pickles. And I am still kind of choosy about when I want them, It really depends. And there's certain things that are commonly pickled in some cultures that I find repulsive. Pickled eggs, I mean, come on. Who the fuck's idea was that? I understand the practical aspects of it. I can even respect it. But there is a line that I feel none of us should cross, and pickled eggs are it for me. It's just, nope, sorry, can't do it. So when they walk in, he says something to Sabe about how nobody is paying attention to them. And he says, like, it's not that I want them to. It's just that we normally get stared at. And we literally flew in on Kandaron's back. Don't you think somebody would have noticed? And Sabe says, is the Exile Splinter's power still in effect or not? Because when she says Imperial Ethos out loud about where they're coming from, somebody kind of stops and shakes their head. But I am sort of wondering if Kandaron did something to hide the fact that they landed. And, you know, because of the way things go a little bit later on, where they're just back in classes and everything seems fairly normal, initially I was sort of wondering, is she hiding the fact that they're back to do something with their presence in a way that, like, folks won't be prepared for because they don't believe these kids have returned yet? But it doesn't seem like it's anything like that. So I don't know, maybe they're all just so busy with their preparations that they didn't, I don't know, that just seems weird to me though. But we got a lot of pickled chat going on. Mordecai says pickled herring, which I have never had. Dan says the worst food in existence. Pickles are a war crime. Mordecai says pickled vegetables are usually fine by me. It's the meat and eggs. Yeah, one of my favorites is a dish that is South American. I think it's like Central American, and it's pickled onions. And oh man, those are good on like as a garnish on like a taco or something. Oh, so good. I actually have made them at home before and highly recommend, kiddos, if you are looking for something that's got some like good texture and flavor to knock the socks off of a taco fan. So let's see. We go chapter 8. The biggest opponent of Archer's accelerated curriculum proposal was, to Talia's surprise, Alustin. And she winds up, or she doesn't, Sabe has a conversation with Alustin a little bit later on about the fact that he is opposing the curriculum and that she is sort of wondering what the deal is with that. And it's, you know, has to do with like how much she trusts him to teach her and the trauma that she has around her lightning ability and, you know, taking his advice on learning that, etc., etc. But what we find out during that conversation is that Alustin has a much more holistic approach to their educations than Archer does, because Archer didn't need a lot of book learning to get his power to the level that it is right now. He just was kind of gifted. And he arrived at Skyhold with his armor already basically like formed and ready to go. So what this kind of made me think of was the concept of people trying to say, well, you don't need to go to college. And I stand by that you don't need to go to college to be successful. But nowadays it's just such a like foregone conclusion that you have to have a degree. But you know, there are people out there who have managed to succeed without certain things that a lot of us see as requirements to success. And it's like, well, yeah, just because they managed to do it without it doesn't mean that everybody could have succeeded without it. Like, some people are just really talented in certain ways that not all of us are. So using a person who is an exception in so many ways, you're literally picking them because they are exceptional. And then saying, well, I'll just do what they did because it's fine. It worked out for them. That's a bit short-sighted. And Archer is kind of, according to Alustin, falling into that trap of like really undervaluing regular classwork because it wasn't necessary for him, and he forgets that other people function differently. And also, their abilities are strange. You know, their abilities are all like, have a little twist to them in such a way that I feel like this extra, the extra like regular classes could potentially lead to some breakthroughs and things that they may not get if they're focusing on magic only. But anyway, and let's see, can we drop cryptography? I'll consider it. I imagine cryptography being like geometry, basically. So Talia is talking to Arthur about staying and hanging out with him while he teaches Sabe lightning magic. And when he hears like moral support, I can stay, he's like, you really don't want to be around a lightning mage when they are still just training. So no. But I think that I have got something else that I could potentially teach you. I am thinking we can find out some new explosions. And Talia is like, that sounds dope as hell. Yes, please. New favorite teacher. So we have an interesting convo here between Sabe and Alestin about her seizing up with trauma every time she tries to use this particular type of magic and trying to cope with that. And he tells her about an injury he sustained when using the, not Havathi sword. What is the name of the sword that they have? It's the one that leaves the echo. He says, the very first day I cut my leg open on one of its echoes while training. I'd been practicing for that day since I could walk so that wouldn't happen. Yet it still did. The echo cut deep into the bone, and if there hadn't been healers immediately on hand, I might have died or lost the leg. It was weeks before I could even pick up my sword again. If it had been left to me, I don't know if I even could have done it. Every time I came near it, I could feel the pain in my leg again, and I just kept envisioning that same pain across my body. I kept imagining its echoes coming for me, and I don't think I slept all the way through a single night. And this is something that I don't know that I have really experienced, like a kind of physical trauma that has led to freezing up in certain situations. I have, phobias like heights, but that's not due to something that happened to me. This is just a fear. And the closest I can come up with is the reaction I see to a dog that is unleashed, because I have been attacked and bitten a couple times, and I just immediately kind of drop into panic mode and get like sweaty palms and that thing where you feel that swoop in your stomach as if you just like went down on a roller coaster, that like, so that's the only thing that I could think of. And that's not something that like, it doesn't feel like the same thing to me. So, because, if I were going to try and compare it, I think it would be more like, I don't want to take walks anymore because I've been attacked and I've been harassed by people. I've been attacked by dogs like 3 times, and being like, you know what? I just don't want to go for walks anymore. I can't do it. It's just, which I won't lie. There've been times where I kind of have felt that way, but it's never been this acute. So can't fully relate. I understand it in like a theory, and he's talking to her about this. And when she asks how he got past it, he's like, I had a dad who basically forced me to do it. And I hated it, and I hated him, but I will say that it worked. And it was like every time I used it, I got numb to that particular type of fear. And I really appreciated that Alestin says to Sabe about this, you have to decide if that's the way to handle this, because I won't force you to use this magic if you don't want to. It's not guaranteed that if you keep doing it, you just lose your fear. And it's not guaranteed that if you keep doing it, you'll succeed. You may fuck up. You may hurt yourself. You may fail. So I'm not trying to like lie to you about how this is going to be a guarantee. I'm just explaining how this went for me and the way that I managed to sort of dull the fear. I don't like using this sword even now, but I can. And that's the main thing. And I just really appreciated that, because I feel that it is a very easy trap to fall into, where people will think because something worked for them, it's just something that works, period. And everybody is so different. You know, they just are. And there are going to be tactics that work beautifully for one person and fuck another person right up. That's just life. So I really liked that he tells her how things worked out for him, but he doesn't try and present this story as a solution for her or a guarantee or even like real wisdom. You know, he admits, oh, my dad really pushed me in a way that made me actually kind of hate him. And I am successful today, but I did low-key hate him for it, which I don't want you to hate me. So I'm going to go ahead and like give you an actual choice as opposed to the way that I was handled. Thank you. Alestin? Oh, Dan says Helicote and Saber. Thank you. Completely forgot the name. But yeah, so, and then when the second part that I kind of like glossed over in favor of talking about how Arthur didn't need much book learning, Arthur also, as Alestin mentions, came closer to dying and closer to watching his kid die and his kid's friends die than he has in a really, really long time. So that is why he is probably feeling a little bit more urgency about getting them trained up, is because there's a real sense there of like, well, what if it doesn't go the way that I want? And, you know, they wind up with like eventually a mission where there are not going to be any adults with them. So he's right in the short term to be this concerned. It turns out they're going to be sent off on their own, and maybe like powering them up a little bit more quickly is going to be key. It kind of bums me out, and like I'm going to reserve judgment on this because who knows, but it kind of bums me out that it's Alestin being like, I really think you guys should focus on your regular classes, but then it's also Alestin who sort of assigns them to this mission in particular without any like supervisors. I was going to say supervision. That's the one. I was going to say supervisatory. Is that a word? I'm feeling like it's not a word, but yeah, you know. Anyway, so countless people who have lived a life as harsh as Arthur have been broken by it, and I think he sometimes forgets that. I didn't know the details, but that's essentially what I imagined, Sabe said. Why would you oppose a path that would make us even better weapons if that's all you wanted for us? It's also why I'm willing to trust you that you'd forgive me if I didn't pursue lightning magic. On top of that, do you remember what I told you after the battle in Ithos? I was serious when I said I was giving you another chance as our teacher. And he says, I hope I don't disappoint you as a teacher then. And she's like, interesting that you added that caveat, but I'm going to try not to think about it. So Mordecai says supervisory. Okay. Supervisory. I didn't know that one. Thank you, Mordecai. Dan, nope. No, it isn't. So then we go into like the sort of routine that they have for a little while. This is, a rough bit because we have some info about how Hugh is getting healed. And it's an interesting thing, I think, that is really neat, which is that Hugh's healing, like what we find out about the way this all works is that the healing can be actually occurring. Physically, you are healing from a wound, and yet the sensation in your body doesn't like go away because your body doesn't believe that that healing has taken place. That's a really neat idea. Am I wrong? Like, I just think that's cool. The concept that, yes, you can actually physically heal wounds with magic, but whether your body understands that that's what's occurring and stops responding as if you were still injured, that's much more up in the air. So we find out that, like, even though the burns and stuff have been healed, he is still having swelling as if his body were responding to like a burn that still occurs. I think that's I just think that's a smart idea, especially, you know, I had been talking about how easy it would be to have an extremely, almost a get out of jail free card if you've got magical healing. And I didn't feel like the author was falling into that trap to begin with. But then to add into it that, okay, well, your physical injuries could be technically healed, but that doesn't mean that you stop suffering from the injury. I just think that's a really smart way to handle things. Anyway, the healers had forced him to wear an enchanted ring that delivered an unpleasant shock to his hand whenever he inhaled through his mouth or let himself slouch too much, both of which were apparently bad for his airways. The ring had woken him up countless times throughout the night at first, but it had been quite some time since it had woken him at all. And the healers had seemed baffled when he asked if there was a less painful way to do it, and one of them had muttered something about him probably wanting medicine to taste good too. Which is a real, like... This is the kind of thing that it's really easy to like sort of laugh at, but when we find out about the scarring on Hugh, him having a reaction to pain like this doesn't feel out of the question. And it doesn't seem like something... I am always going to side-eye people who behave as if wanting to avoid pain is somehow weakness. Come on. Everybody wants to avoid pain in some respect or another. You know, just because you are able to engage with like a physical pain, well, maybe you're somebody who's terrified of rejection. So anytime people are just like, oh, can't handle it, you don't know what the fuck they've been through. Stop it. You know, like, come on. But yeah, they are starting to really like make some progress with him on this. And eventually he has become part of this like mentorship program where he's mentoring other mages. And he's a little bit regretful of how much he has healed because he thinks maybe if I weren't so far along and couldn't speak as well as I can by now, I wouldn't be expected to do this. And let's see. Archer was especially involved with the fighting. This is like the Havathi advancing to the point where he was absent more often than not. He and Headmaster Tarek were being shuttled around the Skyreach range by Skyhold flyers. Godric had grumbled quite a bit when he found out that the Havathi feared Tarek more than his father. The only time the apprentices had seen Tarek use magic had been during Abila and Bakori's attack on the council, and her magic had failed her quickly due to Bakori's spell-form degrading field. Normally, though, Tarek's absurdly huge mana reservoirs, combined with her hyper-efficient spell forms and mana conservation techniques, meant that she could move impossibly large quantities of stone at once. In the rugged Skyreach range, that made her nigh unstoppable against any fixed position. I do want to see this in action. I just do. It's a shame that we didn't get to fully see it with Bakori. Maybe it's on the menu now. So let's see. Godric, who was on friendly terms with quite a few other students, relayed that most of them honestly weren't worried. Havath was powerful, but Skyhold's reputation as an impenetrable fortress meant that many parents actually considered it safer than staying at home. And yeah, the idea that like there's a big thing happening, but everybody is sort of like, I'm not worried about it. It's the kind of thing that I feel would have read a lot less believable if I hadn't lived through some of the things that I have lived through in our country and seen how utterly impossible it is to get people adequately worried at times about certain things. It's just a wild, like, we will get immediately worried about shit that doesn't need it. But then the stuff we need to be really like mustering some response to, we are like, it's fine, it'll be fine. We find out that there are non-human students who have been added to the mix. And there's thought that maybe Rutless the Red, who had been so like a human supremacist, maybe the fact that he's gone means that like things have been able to open up in this way. And most of them are Gorgons, and they're really young. And so the snakes in their scalp are very small and have like just been implanted, which is just a weird thought that they're I know, but I just don't like it. I'm sure Gorgons are great people, but that just sounds so horrifying to me. I really can't. And there's also dragons. There's only like 2 of them, I think, but that's cool. And then there's the mention of how Rhodes is not here anymore and the confrontation that he had with his mentor, Aiden. And Hugh is just basically like, fuck Aiden for like, I don't like Rhodes, but putting him through that and making him feel that shame when it was not his fault is a really fucked up thing to do. And I think it's fascinating that like Aiden allegedly was like attempting to shame Rhodes, but he doesn't give a shit about Hugh himself. You know, he never looks at Hugh. There's no like interaction between them. So I'm really curious about what Aiden's deal is, because I think that maybe he's just a bully. Like, it's possible that he's just kind of a shit. And he picked Rhodes thinking that Rhodes was going to be gifted, and he saw that Rhodes was also a bully and was like kind of thinking, okay, I can mold this kid. And then things didn't go quite the way he had planned, and he wanted to exert his power over Rhodes, and because he is a bully, handled it in this especially poor way. But I don't know if it's as simple as that. The fact that he doesn't interact with Hugh at all, I find really peculiar. And I also, I'm like, is he in league with Bakori or like the fact that he decided that he was going to go to town on Rhodes for running away in that instance, when Rhodes has done plenty of other really shameful shit. Is it just that Aiden doesn't know about those things? I just have a hard time believing that, you know? I don't know. So we also find out that like our little crew is getting excused from a lot of homework, which is pissing teachers off. And they're asking Hugh questions like they're trying to prove that not having the homework means that their studies are suffering, but Hugh can always answer their questions, which kind of irritates them even more. And we find out that Lorena is actually like showing up to some of her classes, and he is noticing that she is having the same kinds of reactions to like loud noises and people that he has. And he is attributing it to PTSD. At least that was the impression I got. Maybe, but I've known a lot of people who have those kinds of sensitivities that do not have that particular kind of trauma. So I think that I am meant to take his word for it in this instance, that that's what it is, but I don't necessarily always find that to be true. So we have also this really interesting thing about plant mages who are like force growing extra crops and everything. Talia had been assigned to work with the enchanters. She didn't have training or knowledge of enchantment, but she was needed for two things: her bonefire affinity and her massive supply of dragon bone. She was being well recompensed for both. Recompensed, though she wasn't telling the group with what yet. And I want to mention, like, not only do we not know about that, but we still don't know about what some of their chosen treats from Ithos were either, or from the Havathi. And let's see. One of the traditional weaknesses of wards was you could only fit so many into an area before they started interfering with each other. A skilled ward crafter could counteract this to an extent, but only so far and with diminishing returns. The massive third ward was a countermeasure for ward interference issues. It acted to dampen the resonances that wards put off into the ether inside its circumference, allowing Skyhold to maintain thousands of smaller wards, as well as the two other grand wards inside its halls. Loarna had heard rumors that Kandaron had built a fourth ring tunnel, far larger than the others, but no one knew for sure. All Loarna knew was that if it existed, it wasn't being used for wards, and so she wasn't interested. Her interest in wards dwarfed even Hugh's. And this is when we get like some descriptions about her behavior, and he is thinking he didn't understand them, but he didn't really need to. They were just the way she was. And I really appreciate that, because so many people feel like unless they can personally understand, it's not valid. And like, I always want to be able to understand, but that doesn't mean that I think not being able to means that a person doesn't have a right to act the way they do. I just want to be able to empathize in a way that feels like I'm truly getting it. And there are things that I'm just never going to get it. And that doesn't mean that what I feel about it matters at all. This is something that I really run into a lot when you're talking about trans issues. And so many cis people who are just like, well, it's like super strange. And well, so what if it's strange to you? Like, it's so literally, so what? That's really what it comes down to for me. It's like, I have never felt the way that a trans person does, but there's lots of feelings I've never experienced. Doesn't mean that they aren't real or don't exist. And it's a strange way to see the world that unless you get it personally, it's simply not real. But a lot of people operate that way. And there's even a moment in this where when Hugh is doing the mentorship thing, he's thinking about how kind of disappointed he is in Kandaron, that she's only recently started taking an interest in warlocks because of Hugh and her attachment to him, and realizing what obstacles some warlocks probably face. And he's like, I wish it hadn't taken me and her knowing me personally for her to give a shit about that. But I guess that's the way things tend to work. And it's really, truly the way things do tend to work. And I wish it weren't, because if we could all just sort of believe the experiences of others without feeling the need to like validate them through our own lens, maybe we could get a little bit further in life. But it seems like unless folks have seen for themselves and personally experienced something, they just act like it doesn't happen. And it's bizarre. And anyway, so yeah, this moment of just being like, he didn't get it, but he didn't have to. Thank you. That's literally all it is. So the scene where he's doing the mentorship thing too, all of these kids are asking him a million questions, and there's one particular kid named Thaddeus who is Thaddeus, and he is like really hyperactive, and Hugh is getting annoyed with him. And at one point he asks if he can like pact with Heliothrax, I think. And Hugh was like, no, nobody can do that. It's really well known that she doesn't do that. But then that was also what Hugh was thinking himself, you know, like he had also been, and so he's like getting snippy and has very little patience, but in some ways Thaddeus is only saying out loud the things that Hugh was secretly thinking to himself when he first found out he was a warlock. And let's see, let's see. Thaddeus managed to struggle free of Ventus' grasp. Can your mana reservoirs be damaged by a spell? No, they exist inside the ether. I'm actually most interested in the physical alterations from being a warlock. It seems fairly similar to the bonds we share with our snakes. Is there any way to choose how your body changes? And this is interesting to me because Hugh says that he doesn't think so. But I'm not sure that's true because he didn't choose what's happening to his eyes. But maybe if he had known something was coming, there would have been a way to handle it. I don't know. And yeah, this whole like concept of bonding, they're all fascinated with the fact that he has such big mana reservoirs that he could bond with more than one contracted partner. Most of them can't. I don't think a single one of them has the option to. So then we go to chapter 11, and this is the scene where Talia comes in, and she says, Hugh and I finally spent the night together last night. And I just want to address how casually this is handled, because in a lot of stories, them sleeping together would be a whole thing. And him sleeping with Ava was a little bit of a thing, but it, you know, we don't see anything. It's just the sort of lead up to her asking him to come to her bed. And this, with the two of them, even though we have seen them together and seen them being affectionate and everything, there hasn't been a lot of sort of personal time spent with the two of them. And they're young enough that having sex is still kind of a big deal, you know? Not to say that it's ever not a big deal, but it's a different thing when you're a certain age. And I am just surprised at how sort of laissez-faire everybody is about something that I think is kind of a big deal. I also understand, though, that she doesn't want to talk about the sex. So it may be that they're just picking up on her vibe and like, okay, so the sex isn't what she wants to talk about. And this, when she says, I saw his back for the first time without a shirt. He actually tried to hide it from me at first, but scars, old scars, lots and lots of old scars all over his back. And she says that they look like scars from a switch that weren't even cared for afterwards. Like they didn't clean them or anything. And I have a actually weird, like parallel thing that happened with a guy I was seeing. We had actually slept together a few times. And I noticed that he kept his shirt on. And he was a little chubby. So I thought maybe he was just kind of self-conscious. And I didn't push it because I knew what it was like to be self-conscious. And I was trying to give him some room and thinking like, if we keep seeing each other and he grows more comfortable, he may eventually like get to a point where he's comfortable with that. And then like the 5th or 6th time we slept together, he was like, I have to show you something. And he pulled his shirt off and he had this horrible scar all over his back from when his father had taken the deep fry pan of hot oil and poured it on his back when he was like 8 years old. It was like, you guys, one of the most hideous things I've ever seen. And it was, he just hid it for so long. I had no idea. I knew that his dad had been a piece of shit, but I didn't know it was like that. So the feeling that Talia has here of just like rage, and you're trying to keep cool because they don't want to talk about it. They want you to know because it has to, like you have to figure out how to balance as the partner your emotional reaction to a thing versus what they're looking for from you. And what he was looking for from me was simply assurance that I wasn't repelled by him, which makes me so upset even now because, like, imagine being the kind of person who sees that sort of scarring and is like, ew, to the person, the victim of, like, who would be like that? But evidently those monsters are out there. And I think I just, like, he had his back to me and I leaned forward and just, like, kissed the scar. And he just started crying. And I will never forget that. Things did not work out with us. And he really had a lot that he needed to deal with before he was going to be able to be in a relationship. But it was the kind of moment where I started to really, like, appreciate how you can, like, have gotten to know someone you think pretty well and then find out there's a whole layer you haven't even touched yet, So yeah, this bit with her, and she's like, they talk about getting rid of scars being really difficult for healers. And they are all sort of feeling like they really want to go and fucking handle Hugh's family, which I can't help but encourage. I know Hugh wouldn't like it, and I know it wouldn't do any good, but God, I still want him to. I just do, for my own personal satisfaction. And that's exactly what Talia says. She's like, I want to go do it, but it would only be to assuage my own guilt that I couldn't help him. I didn't even know him, but I still feel like I should have been able to do something. I want to protect him from something that's already happened. And she says, I found this kind of funny, that she likes Ava, but she still didn't, like, give her the credit that she deserved, since Ava never mentioned the scars to anybody. And I was like, it's weird that you say that, Talia, when you're here telling them all about it. And granted, I think it's different for her to tell them than it would have been for Ava to tell them, because these are her own close friends. It's not like Ava telling, where these are more acquaintances of hers. And if it turns out that Ava had told a good friend that was Radan, then maybe that would be fine, But I did find it funny that Talia is giving her, like, credit for it, but she isn't doing it herself. And she just asks them to not tell Hugh that she talked to them about it. But yeah, this is like the first indicator we've really gotten about how bad it was with Hugh. We did hear him say something about how the abuse was worse even than he had told them, but he didn't want to get into it. And that was kind of the only hint we ever got. And finding out that it was like this is just, there's likely no closure to be had, it's a story, so maybe there will be something that happens. In real life, a lot of times there isn't, because unfortunately shit doesn't really work that way. And sometimes you just do the thing that's like the safest for yourself, which is to distance yourself from a person, because oftentimes to get closure, you have to return to the abuser. And that's not a thing most people are interested in. So I just really want them to go and like basically burn his family's house down, like genuinely. So this is when we find out about the assignment that Alestin wants to send Hugh and the others on to escort a supply ship. And Canderon digs her heels in a little bit. Alestin is like, dude, they are more than qualified at this point. You know they are. And we get a mention about the, people who have passed away who were on the council, and the thrones. And there's like the one that had been the chlorine mage has died, and I can't remember the name of the other one who died. But I thought that this was, let's see. Oh yeah, Sulasa and Zulf's thrones had already been removed, and Canderon didn't have a throne, just a deep basin worn into the stone. So Hugh is going through some planar magic calculations, which are extremely complicated. And I am just going to gloss over this because it's too much information for me. I'm sure a lot of other people love this concept, but too much for me. There's a mention about how the crystals of her wings are much larger than they appear, and were partially submerged in extraplanar spaces. And when he asks how big her wings are at full size, she doesn't answer. I don't even really understand what this means. That basically you only see a fraction of her wings, and they just sort of cut off into another dimensional space. Is that it? Like, the concept of that is so bizarre to me to try and even keep in my head. And maybe that's how she flies, because like Hugh is thinking at one point about how her wings don't beat. She's like got a very, very still flight. And I'm wondering if there's something going on in the extraplanar space that is carrying her forward, and thus she doesn't need to beat her wings at all. But I don't know what that would even look like. So let's see. The risks are simply too high, Canderon said. And I love this. When Alestin is like, if we keep them here and we have a siege, that he's like, him and the others are going to do some shit. And she tries to say that Hugh isn't that stupid, to which Alestin is like, well, maybe he's not, but his friends fucking are. And do you think he's not going to just go along with what they say? You make me sound like a complete pushover who would do anything to please my friends, Hugh said. Alestin and Canderon both gave him flat looks. Fair enough, I suppose, Hugh finally said. And finally, Canderon just goes with it. So we get the beginning of chapter 12, which is them loading up the ship to head out. And Archer is pretty anxious about them going without supervision, to which Godric is like, you're out here fighting Havathi. Like, if one of us is meant to be worried about the other, it should definitely be me, not you. And let's see, you know what? I'm way behind. I'm realizing at the time I'm only on chapter 12 here. And I have to get to the herdsman, which is 14. I am going to just kind of graze over this whole thing and get to the fact that they are riding on a ship that is definitely like smuggler ship. And the people who are on board are not friendly to our crew. They are acting like that these are like students that were foisted off on them. But we find out later that at least the captain does know who they are. So it's sort of a weird thing where it's like they're being totally underestimated, and Hugh is tempted a couple times to like tell them who he is, but he doesn't. And finding out that maybe they knew the whole time and are still acting this way really surprised me. And the whole like vibe of this trip is just tense. You know, these people are not just like indifferent, they're actively rude and unpleasant, and they mock Talia for having a weak stomach, and just generally feel there's also like the first mate, I think it is, who is for whatever reason giving off extremely shady energy and keeps looking at them in such a way that everybody notices. Even like Talia, we're in her POV, she's thinking about them in terms of like the creepy first mate. And I am really, really curious what the deal is with the first mate. Like where's that coming from? A part of me was like, is this Rhodes in disguise? Like I kept thinking of somebody who is going to be antagonistic towards our group, who they like, who would be on the run or laying low somehow. And he's the only person that I could think of. So I don't know. But we find out that the main thing that's like exported from Dragonclaw is sunling meat and scales. And there's a conversation about how sunling meat basically doesn't have much taste and doesn't maintain its texture. So it's used as filler in a lot of foods. And there's this huge like landmark, the turtle shell. A massive sea turtle shell was wedged perfectly level between two of the cliffs. It was bigger than Candoron, bigger than any living animal he'd ever seen, save Ephorus. Indris could have perched comfortably atop, or perhaps even sprawled. There was enough air beneath it to sail a large sand ship past, and there were several trails in the sand indicating captains did just that. Filling the turtle shell was a palace. A massive balcony jutted from the opening where the tail should have been, with an opulent ballroom visible behind it. Which, that sounds pretty cool, but it's a weird moment here with the captain. There's a reason that turtle don't go back to sea no more. He's well quit of it. The deeps are a nasty place. Plenty of great powers that have fled the sea for drier climes. Mott just had the bad luck to be followed out by his enemies. I'll take honest sand over deep water any day. And Hugh, for his part, is kind of like, do you need something? Because this guy doesn't come talk to them except to be a dick. So he's hoping to get rid of him. And he points something out and says, watch the sunlings. And they see how all of them move as a group. And he points out, like, that's not what he's called the herdsman for, though. And only Hugh can see this initially. Sabe uses her goggles to see. Like, I think hundreds, they say, of huge chameleons that are like up the sides of the slopes of the cliffs and everything. And evidently they are vicious and very loyal. And he will, if he is in a bad mood, take his enemies and feed them to his lizards, which at first I was sort of feeling like not that threatened. Chameleons don't inherently seem like scary. They're almost cute in their weird way. But then when we see how big they are and find out that like Godric, the biggest of all of them, could have been eaten in one bite, then I was like, all right, never mind. That's more smoke than I'm interested in. Thank you, but no. So they head towards the main palace, and we're in Talia's POV for a lot of this. Hugh had been distracted for the entire walk. Talia glanced at Mackerel, who was half asleep, hanging off Hugh's shoulder. When Talia was sure Mackerel knew she was looking, she gestured at Hugh with her chin. Mackerel rustled his pages. The crystal spell book was definitely a he. She didn't care what anyone else said, and sleepily yanked on his strap. Hugh stumbled into her. Mackerel, quit that. I'm sorry, Talia. She smiled at him. It's not your fault. Hugh smiled back and reached out for her hand. When he wasn't looking, Talia winked at Mackerel. I really liked this little interaction. You know, he's just like distracted a little bit, and she's sort of going, hey, I want pay me attention. Come here. Have him come over here. This is very my energy. You know, I get a little bit snotty if Owen is like buried in his phone for too long. I'm just like, I am right here. Can you please? So they get to the palace, and Talia is sort of like, this place is not as cool as I was expecting. There's just not a lot of like design to the whole, like there's no thesis to it, you know? Everything is just sort of mishmashes of designs and colors and whatnot. And let's see, the herdsman's throne room must have taken up at least a third of the space inside the shell. One end of the room opened onto the balcony they'd seen on the ride in, while the herdsman sat at the other end. The ceiling was just the curving upper shell of the turtle far above their heads. The decor was a bit more to Talia's taste than the rest of the palace. There was no gold, jewels, or any other decorations. Instead, there were just immense columns and rafters of yellowing scrimshawed bone, almost certainly from the turtle that had once filled this shell. Even the floor was made of countless mismatched planks of bone, albeit without the carvings. Unlike the shell, she could feel the bone with her affinity sense. She wasn't sure what the shell was made out of, but it wasn't bone. Which I was kind of like bummed by, because I was like, oh, maybe she could just move this whole bitch. But not exactly. And she starts to realize like the scrimshaw is spell forms, and they're all over the place. Anti-magic enchantments. So the herdsman, for his part, is a dick. And something that the captain had said, he said to them, he'll jump whenever Skyhold says so, but he doesn't like to be reminded of it. And he even says in this conversation about how Skyhold is like, first of all, he doesn't like Candoron. History's turning against your master and her puppets, and I won't be risking my city to help her out of the trap she's climbed into. And the whole like way that he comes at them here is just very antagonistic. He doesn't want to be talking to them, and I wanted him to seem a little bit more like diplomatic, but he has no interest in that. So I guess it really is just the virtue of his power that, you know, some people, it has to be a combo of power and political acumen. And it feels like for him, it's just sheer power, because otherwise I don't see, I don't know. Maybe he's just really different with the people that are on his own side. But anyway, he tells them that he wants them gone by noon tomorrow. And the captain's like, that's not enough time for us to load our ship up. To which he's like, I don't give a shit. I said what I said. And then Godric, who had been given a scroll to deliver, pulls it out. And the king takes the scroll, but he doesn't read it while they're there. He just takes it and then says, you can leave. So I had been sort of expecting that he'd open it and then suddenly change his tune and like his whole attitude would shift because of whatever it said. But we don't actually see it here. So they begin to file out, and Talia makes sure that she takes the lead. She didn't turn toward the hallway, but instead kept walking out onto the balcony. The endless erg loomed beyond the railing, framed by the massive ridges to either side. When she reached the edge, she leapt onto the wide, flat banister, using the smallest burst of force from her enchanted boots. The others followed her up, having caught on to what she was doing. Even the smuggler seemed to have caught on, though his first mate looked slightly alarmed. Talia turned back to the herdsman and bowed mockingly. After standing back up, she stared at the man long enough for him to understand that she meant him no respect. Then she leaned backwards and fell. And I am not sure what's happening here. I'm assuming she's controlling something with her bone affinity, and I'm not really sure why. It feels like she's just trying to stunt on him for the sake of it, and it may very well be that's all it is. But I don't know, like, does she suspect a trap? And she's like, let's go out this way because the way we came in isn't safe. Is she trying to make a point to him about the fact that she could control his throne room via her affinity, and that it is sort of maybe not too smart of him to play this game? You know, like, I don't know what it is she's attempting to do here, but everybody else is following along with her, and nobody is speaking up and being like, Talia, what are you doing? So I have to assume that they are on board with her plan. So yeah, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what it is that she's about to do. But yeah, so that's the end of that chapter. And there's just one thing that I'm going to back up. I just wanted to make sure that I was able to get to the end of it before running out of time. But they have a conversation when they're about to leave Storm. Oh my God, you guys, Skyhold. I was about to say Storm's End. Song of Ice and Fire in my head. Godric mentions to Sabe that her mother's on one of the ships that they're looking at. And she says that her fleet won't be back for another year or two. She's a powerful archmage in her own right, or they wouldn't be able to take that trip, no matter how many lesser mages we packed on board the fleet. The trip to the Cloudspine continent is much farther and more dangerous than the trip to Galed. Still safer than trying to reach the bigger continents on the far side of the world, though. Has your family ever sent missions down to the southern polar regions? Sabe shook her head. Not for a century now. Storm mages aren't enough to keep the poison away from the ships, and even healers and poison mages have trouble surviving exposure to the poisons for long. Which, that is wild. They're poisonous? Like, I'm assuming in the air? Or, you know? But Hugh, who is like, well, what is down there? She says nobody knows. There are leviathans that are able to like go in and out, but there's only a few people who have gone and survived. The leading theory involves volcanoes constantly spewing toxic gases. And Godric is like, there are also real weird creatures though. You know, like, I don't know if that makes sense with that theory. And Hugh says maybe a labyrinth connected somewhere, nasty, ruptured. And that's all that they do. That's the only conversation they have about this. But I'm sort of fascinated by this. Like, what's going on down there? I feel like this is definitely going to be significant eventually. All right. I'm going to head out. But thank you guys so much for listening. I'm going to be finally starting to catch up with posting these episodes. I fell off because of my emergencies. I was still recording, but editing and posting, I fell way behind. So I'm going to be catching up, and I appreciate everybody's patience on that. So I will see you all on Thursday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.